Good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. And welcome to this evening's presentation, which is about Brazil, with Helen Bryon, who is one of my wonderful colleagues from Wildlife Worldwide. Bit of housekeeping to begin with, as there's a lot of us here in the meeting. Staggeringly, nearly 200 connections, which is really rather fantastic. We kindly ask that you remain muted along with your camera off during the course of the presentation. Since we obviously live in a big brother state, I do have the ability to, or the facility I should say, to control the mute function from here. So if anyone gets in a muddle, I can turn your mics to mute. Number of you have already submitted questions that you would like me to ask Helen at the end of the presentation, which I should be delighted to do. We've had some lovely questions already. You're very welcome also to use the group chat, which you will see on your screens. If you're unfamiliar with where that is, if you're on a computer, it's at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse, you should see the thing which says chat somewhere in the middle of your screen. If you click on that, you're then able to send me a chat message, and I will see that, and I can pose a question to Helen at the end. If you're on a handheld device, I believe that the chat facility is at the top of your screen when you move your mouse. As you will appreciate, there are occasions when we have technical difficulties. Hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties this evening. Internet speed isn't always stable, but please bear with us in the event that we have any issues. As I say, hopefully we won't, but let's see how we get on. We've had a lot of success so far, which is nice. It's very, very nice to see so many familiar names on the list. Of course, if we were in a face-to-face environment, I'd be saying how nice it is to see so many familiar faces. But there's certainly many, many familiar names, which is lovely. And that's really great to see. Thank you very much for attending this evening and for joining us. It's, as I say, it's lovely that there's so many of you here. On a personal note, it's very, very humbling for us that you guys are sticking with us through these rather turbulent and difficult times that we're in. We have had so many lovely words of encouragement throughout this period. And obviously, we're looking forward to sharing sunnier times with everybody. But I think they're coming. I think those sunnier times are coming. I must also say thank you very much to those of you who perhaps don't know us quite so well, and thank you for taking the time to spend your evening with us too. As part of our thank you, at the end of the presentation, we'll be sharing with you a discount code, which will enable you to all receive £100 off your next booking with us, which hopefully will go some way towards enabling you to plan and enjoy a rather lovely holiday. So worth just mentioning a couple of things about Wildlife Worldwide. Forgive me if you guys know this, but I know some of you will and some of you won't necessarily. I began Wildlife Worldwide in 1992. My name's Chris Breen. I began by designing bespoke holidays to Africa primarily, as a result of having been a walking safari guide in Zambia's Luangwa Valley. And we did a lot in Africa, as you can imagine, the Masai Mara, Serengeti and so on. And then we expanded our portfolio out into places like India and Nepal and Borneo and Canada and all other lovely places, including then subsequently South America. Since then, we have grown from just being a tailor-made holiday operation to a company that offers a very, very big and broad range of wildlife holidays, not only tailor-made trips, but also group holidays, really to the very best places on earth. The wildlife for us is, of course, not just animals, it's also birds, and insects and trees and flowers and all the wonderful, wonderful things that there are in the great big wide world out there. At this point, I should perhaps just say something about Brazil before introducing the lovely Helen, but I should probably just say something about Brazil and the COVID issues. You know, I think we're all only too well aware how hard Brazil and South America generally has been hit by COVID. Brazil is a country which, like many around the world, needs our support. We're not precisely sure when we're going to be able to travel to Brazil and the other lovely countries in South America. But what we can be sure of is that when we get there, we will be greeted warmly by magnificent hosts, and there will be some really wonderful opportunities to see some really great wildlife. I now will have the great pleasure of introducing Helen, who actually I can't see, but I know she's there somewhere. Introducing Helen, with whom I have worked for a number of years now. Helen is someone who is unbelievably enthusiastic, shall we say, and boisterous about the locations around the world that she has visited. Helen is one of the all-time greats in the travel industry, I have to say, having travelled to some incredible places around the world. And as I say, she always returns with boundless amounts of energy and drive and enthusiasm. So, Helen, I'm hoping you're there because I can't actually see you, but I know you're not muted, and I know you've got your camera on. So
I'm here.
So I know you're there. Got you. Right. Okay. Now I can see you. Look, brilliant. Hopefully my introduction to you wasn't too desperately embarrassing, was it?
It was fine. Thank you very much.
Jolly good. Okay. Hey, Helen, over to you. And I can just before you start, I'm just going to say we've already had since during the course of my introduction, we probably had about 1,000 questions. I should say just very quickly before Helen starts. Helen will speak for about 40 minutes or so, and for those of you who have been on these Zoom presentations in the past, there will be a Q&A session at the end. As I say, fire questions to me on the chat, and I will pose those questions to Helen, and we'll do all of that at the end. Helen, over to you.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Chris. Lovely. Right, okey-doke. So yes, I'm Helen, and I'm going to be talking to you for the next 40 minutes or so. Sorry about that, but I will try and keep up with some of this enthusiasm that Chris has mentioned. So I have been to Brazil a couple of times now, very fortunate to say that, and it is a country that I just think is fabulous. Now, if you ask anybody what they think of in terms of natural wonders as soon as the country Brazil is mentioned, I would imagine that the vast majority of people would immediately think of the Amazon, of vast tracts of untouched rainforest, just begging to be explored on a river cruise where you can get out into smaller vessels to really sort of dig into the tributaries, enjoy primates, enjoy bird life. I mean, the bird life is incredible, but I'm going to come back onto that later. Reptiles and vast untouched space. For others, they might think of Iguazu, the mighty Iguazu Falls. My roots are in Africa, having grown up there, having lived and worked as a guide out there. And I hate to say it, but I have to betray Africa now, because Iguazu Falls is probably one of the most impressive waterfalls that I have ever come across. Sorry, Victoria, but it is fantastic. Now, whether you want to visit the Amazon, whether you want to visit Iguazu, we can arrange all of that on group trips or tailor-made trips. But on my last visit, which was 2.5 years ago, I had just one thing on my mind, and that was jaguars. I'm a big cat girl, unashamedly. I love these creatures, and I missed out on an opportunity to visit Brazil's Pantanal wetland area back in 2012. And I am so grateful for the fact that I finally got to visit in 2018. It didn't disappoint. Now, I went in having been told that leopards were essentially, or jaguars were leopards on steroids. Now, that is an incredibly apt description. But I went there thinking, if I can get a flick of a tail, if I can get a flick of an ear, if I can see those wonderful rosettes just creeping away from me up some riverbank somewhere, that life would be good. I will have seen my jaguar. Brilliant. But if you think that these creatures are elusive, I mean, we can't guarantee anything, but if you think that they're elusive, if you think that they're nocturnal, if you think that they're shy, absolutely not. Negative. So I literally could not believe my luck when, I kid you not, around 7 to 8 minutes in to a river transfer to my accommodation up the mighty Capybara River, and I was on a long motorboat preparing myself for an hour-long transfer in the baking sun. I was thoroughly looking forward to the trip, and literally 7 or 8 minutes into this river transfer, and we see a fisherman moored on the side of the river, and he's lazily pointing his arm over towards the riverbank repeatedly, and my hopes started to go through the roof. We stopped the engine, we drifted over towards the side of the river, and we looked up. We visit during the dry season, which is really end of May into June through to October into November. And within those months, the Pantanal area is at its driest. So you're sitting on a motorized boat and you're looking up at the riverbanks, because that is where jaguars are going to be patrolling, looking down onto the sandbanks below, looking for caiman and for capybara, which they primarily consist on. So I'm sitting on this boat in the middle of the day in the baking sun, and I'm looking up at this riverbank, and I am hoping against all hopes that my wish is about to come true. And there was a small gap in the vegetation, and I pretty much thought I was going to spontaneously combust when I saw this most beautiful whiskered face with bright, deep yellow eyes staring right back at me. She was there, and then she was gone. And I was like, yowzers, literally day one in the jaguar zone, and more on that later, and mission accomplished. I'd seen my first jag. Couldn't believe it. We sat there for a little bit longer, and we just stared at this stretch of riverbank in case this magnificent creature was to appear again. And luck was on our side. The gods were with us. Here she is. She started to emerge from the vegetation. You can see how thick it is there. And before I knew it, she was fully out in the open, probably 20 meters away from me, just flopped herself down in the sand and was staring at us, taking in her surroundings. Then she decided she'd get up a little bit, she'd come a little bit closer, scouring all the time, and closer still, until she decided, okay, I'm just going to park myself here for a little bit. And this is now the image that is my screensaver on my laptop and my iPad. I look at this creature every single day, and I still have to pinch myself that this sighting actually happened. There was nobody else there, aside from the fisherman, who was a little bit downstream by now. We had this gorgeous creature to ourselves. She was not shy, she was not elusive, she was completely and utterly at home in her environment. And I thought, crikey, I've arrived. This is insane, absolutely insane. The more insane thing is that I was to spend 4 nights in the jaguar zone, and she was the first of 24 sightings of 16 individual jaguars that I would have over that period. Incredible. Now, as I said before, we're not going to guarantee anything wildlife-wise. We would be daft to do so. Wildlife is unpredictable, nature is unpredictable. However, all of us in the sales team at Wildlife Worldwide have visited the Pantanal at different times during the dry season of May to November, and all of us have had successful sightings of jaguar. Not only jaguar, there are 4 cats in this area. There are incredible birds to be seen. If you're not into your birds, trust me when I say that you will be after a trip to Latin America. The colour, the noise, these hyacinth macaws, they're a success story in the Pantanal. Their numbers had been diminished due to being captured to be kept as live pets. Their numbers are now increasing. You just sit under a tree with a bunch of these above you, gaggling and looking at you and flopping down to be right next to you. I mean, their wingspan, when it flaps next to your head, it's quite something to behold. So hyacinth macaws and more bird life than you can shake a stick at is what you can also expect with a visit to the Pantanal. In addition, after a previous trip to Guyana, I was desperately hoping for some more encounters with giant river otter. Wonderful, wonderful creatures, and the Pantanal did not disappoint. I love one of the strange people, few strange people that do, but I think their eyes have just an insane beauty. I love them. I fear them, but I love them. And you, being at water level, have an awful lot of opportunities for hanging out with caiman, Yakari caiman, as the type that you'll find here. You don't even notice the fly just to the right of this one's eyes. You're captivated by the closeness and that you can share such close space with a wild creature. And oh, don't get me going on capybara. Oh my world. The world's largest rodent, and they absolutely captivated me. Sunning themselves on the sandbanks, families of them, with their pink bellies. They're not to be trifled with. You know, jaguars prey on them. They will put up one hell of a fight, but they are gorgeous. And every time we came down a bend in the river and there was a family of capybara, I couldn't help myself but go, happy cappies! But let's move on that. Sorry, all. So where exactly are we? Okay, so where we are, if you were to put a pin slap bang into the middle of the South American continent, you would find the Pantanal. To the north, you have the mighty Amazon basin, and that really just infringes on the northern parts of the Pantanal that you can see here. So whereas the Amazon is known as the lungs of South America, the Pantanal is known as the kidneys. It's a huge 80,000 square mile area of wetland that basically has seasonal flooding. So the mighty Paraguay, Quiaba, Paquiri, Taquari, all of these rivers swell with the rains that fall from November to April, and they slowly move south, flooding the Pantanal in a north to south direction. It can take 4 months for this flooding to reach one area to the other, from the north to the south. So that just gives you an idea of the vastness of this ecosystem. Now, if we come a little bit closer, I'm going to zoom in onto the Pantanal area itself. But in terms of getting there, despite being slap bang in the middle of the continent, it's remarkably easy. An overnight flight out of Heathrow, non-stop into Sao Paulo, will see you arrive at about 5 or 6 o'clock this morning. And by 8 o'clock, you can be on a flight into the Pantanal area. And that's only about a 2-hour domestic flight. So access in and out of this area is very, very easy. Now, The Pantanal is generally considered to be split into two distinct areas, the north and the south. Very, very broadly speaking, if you're keen to see jaguar, like I was, you would head to the northern part of the Pantanal. The southern Pantanal, the specialist species there really is giant anteater. Although both species roam the entire Pantanal area, think jaguars north and giant anteater south, and then you can maximise your time spent and where you ideally want to spend it. Now, to access the north, from Sao Paulo, you would get a connecting flight into the northern area here, into Cuiabá. Now, Cuiabá is quite a big city. We don't hang around there. The airport is tiny. You're in, you're out, and you're on the road, and you're heading down into the northern Pantanal area. This is easily combined with the southern Pantanal. So if you wanted to do both, we have group trips that visit both areas, or do the northern Pantanal first, and then you can head down to Campo Grande in the south. You can also fly from Sao Paulo straight into Campo Grande, so you can choose the order in which you visit. Now, in the south, you've got crystal clear turquoise streams where you can go snorkeling with anaconda, potentially. Some of you might be horrified at that. Others of you will begin to start chomping at the bit. But as I say, for the south, giant anteater, very much so. There are jaguar projects there, but I'm going to talk you through what I did, which was essentially our most popular small group trip, which concentrates on the northern Pantanal only, but can be extended, and that's called Wildlife of the Pantanal. So after your non-stop flight into Sao Paulo overnight, connecting flight to Cuiabá, and then we immediately start our journey towards the Pantanal. And the first 100 kilometers will be on tar road and will take you into a small town called Poconé, and from there you enter what is known as the Trans-Pantanera, which is a raised gravel road with bridges crisscrossing all of the waterways. There is an absence of roads in the Pantanal because it is flooded for much of the year. The only road that you will have is the Trans-Pantanera, which takes you from Poconé down to Porto Jofre, which is just appearing on your screen now. You're talking about 145 kilometers between Poconé and Porto Jofre, but you take your time because the minute you enter the Trans-Pantanera through this gate here, you're on this raised gravel road, and the wildlife extravaganza begins. So these are my holiday snaps. So if you've listened into any of the other presentations that we've had by some of our professional photographers, please don't expect quite the same quality potentially, but these are mine. And what I love about the Trans-Pantanera is that immediately to the right of the right-hand gate post here is a pool of water. So the Trans-Pantanera, that you start going through it, you'll see termite mounds immediately, so do keep an eye out for giant anteater. They're there, they're just more commonly associated with sightings in the south. But the minute you pass through this gate, you'll get out, you'll take your photo of the gate, and then on the right-hand side is a pool of water. That pool of water is where it all begins. There were a multitude of Yacare caiman within that pool of water, primarily fish feeders, but we also had sightings of anaconda being taken by caiman, would you believe? We saw eels being taken by caiman, we saw fish being taken by caiman, but also the amount of water and the amount of fish in this area means that your water birds are plentiful. Running around all of the caiman in this little pool here, we had sunbitters, we had jacanas, and then the minute you start to head just to sit and take it all in and listen to the sounds and take your eyes off the caiman, you look up and you've got your kingfishers. There are 5 species you could potentially see here. I can't even begin to tell you how many species of heron, storks, ibis, cormorants, anhingas, gallinules, ducks, egrets, spoonbills. The water birds that you find here are incredible. Now, they are often posing like this to dry off, to enable the sun. Along with a number of birds, you're going to get their raptor prey or predators. This is a black-collared hawk, and as soon as you then start to commence your journey down the Trans-Pantanera, you're immediately aware of other wildlife that you could potentially come across immediately. Looking from right to left there, deer. I was absolutely not expecting to find deer in the Pantanal, but there's brocket deer, there's marsh deer, and they're just walking around, stepping over caiman, cool as cucumbers. You can see the jaguar there, you can see the capybara, and then if you're lucky, you've got the giant eater and also its smaller tree climbing cousin, the tamandua. So nothing happens fast as you go down the Trans-Pantanera. This is an experience, this is an excursion, even though it's actually a transfer to your first lodge. Now, you've just come off an overnight flight from London, you've had a domestic flight, you're now commencing a road journey to the first property. You just want a shower and you just want to be able to stretch your legs. And what happens? You end up in a traffic jam. We tried to get off the Trans-Pantanera and we had to sit there for about 45 minutes because of a vast number of cattle that were blocking the exit off the Trans-Pantanera. And immediately my head's going, what? I'm in a wildlife area. I'm being told that I'm potentially going to see jaguar and giant anteater on this road, and I'm stuck in a cattle traffic jam. Well, over 95% of the Pantanal is actually privately owned, and it's primarily ranch land. And ranchers traditionally had a very poor relationship with the wildlife, especially with jaguars. Jaguar will go for cattle, of course it will, and therefore they often used to get shot whilst trying, and therefore jaguar numbers were depleting. What we're now finding is that in the last 10 years or so, there's been an awful lot of conservation work taking place in ecotourism, and ranchers are beginning to see the advantage in working with these organisations and encouraging ecotourism, which is why I firmly reiterate what Chris said in his introduction. In terms of COVID, as is happening in Africa and in other wilderness places all over the world, COVID is having a huge effect because no one is able to visit. Now, a lot of these ecotourism lodges are now dependent on ecotourism. The revenue that they bring in is ploughed into conservation initiatives, and therefore, the minute we're able to travel again, I really encourage you to do so. I know that I will be, you know, just to try and get the world back to normal a little bit more where possible. Now, once we'd got through the cattle traffic jam, we got to our first stop where we just spend the first 2 nights on our group trip, Wildlife for the Pantanal, and that's at a lovely, lovely ex-cattle ranch called Pouso Alegre. And immediately what you'll notice is that there are bridges everywhere, testament again to the fact that for a vast number of months in the year, this area is underwater. So what is grassland, and therefore attracts your eaters, so your, in terms of bird life, doves, cardinals, manakins, gawans, curassows. So you've got grassland attracting seed eaters, and then during the wet season, all of the birds come in that are the water birds and the fish eaters and so on. So the beauty of Pouso Alegre is that you can just walk, which again is ideal when you've been on a plane for 24 hours. So I took myself off. I went for walks. There were hyacinth macaws in these trees that you could see around us. And immediately you are becoming accustomed to the wildlife that is in the area. Black-tailed marmosets. You've got marsh deer, brocket deer as already mentioned. My guide spotted this incredible spot. This is a greater putu, master of disguise. This is taken with a 300mm lens, and I still had to pretty much be on top of this bird before I saw it. You're able just to get up and personal. There's very little fear with the wildlife in this area. So I went past a number of trees where there were black vultures at eye level, just watching me, almost like if you're in Baja or the Galapagos. They're just getting on with their business and you're just walking straight past them. I'm also quite a turkey fan. I'm thinking turkey vultures now. I'm also quite a vulture fan. I think they do an invaluable job in the ecosystem. So to be able to just sit on the ground and surround myself with these creatures and take photos of them and just be in their world was a real privilege. Tegus. If you're on a vehicle, you just drive straight past this. But I just lay down on the ground and started taking pictures of this dude. And again, completely unconcerned at my... And then as the sun began to fall, we made our way to a waterhole where they've sort of taken on the African sundowner tradition, which was lovely. Along came this crab-eating fox. He walked right past me, walked up to the waterhole, and there we encountered another small mammal, a tera. So rodents, snakes, rabbits, this is what these sort of creatures would be feeding on. Crabs, obviously, for the crab-eating fox. And in the succulent vegetation that you can see in the foreground here, it was just teeming with birds. The noise is wonderful. We then went on a night safari. So if you're keen on seeing things like jaguarundi, ocelot, some of margay, some of the smaller cats, chances are you'd have to be very, very lucky to actually see them, but you've got to get out there and try. So we will offer night safaris at Pouso Alegre. Now, I didn't have to go on a night safari to see this wonderful chap. This was just pure and utter luck. I travelled in September, so towards the end of the dry season, and we had one night, I was lying in my bed and we had a monster thunderstorm. Now, I love a good thunderstorm. There was lightning, there was thunder, it was bucketing down. So I simply went outside my room. There was a giant anteater. I literally couldn't believe it. This is the beauty of the Pantanal. So again, you're not chances of seeing them, we can't guarantee anything, but they're there. My colleague Sarah, who'd gone in the June before me, she saw giant anteater here as well. So you just never know, but the more time you can be outside looking for wildlife, the better your chances of success. So after a couple of days, sorry, before we go on, you have to use your imagination here. It was pouring down with rain and I was running, but I was determined to get a picture of the giant anteater. So there we are, that's my kind of arty shot. But after a couple of days of just sort of gently introducing ourselves to the Pantanal and the surroundings and becoming familiar with some of the most common birds, it was time to head to the jaguar zone. So my excitement levels were going through the roof. So what this means is that you climb aboard this elevated open vehicle and you slowly traverse further south down the Trans-Pantanera to that Porta Joffre, that point where the road ends in the Pantanal and where you get out onto your motorized longboats, and all of your safaris are then done from the water. So this took about 3 or 4 hours. It will vary depending on the sightings that you have along the way. Once again, because the Trans-Pantanera is raised, you have your binoculars, you have your cameras at the ready constantly. You're looking down into the marshy areas and the lakes and the wetlands on either side of you, and you're snapping away and you're taking photos. So again, more herons. These are southern screamers, always seen in pairs. Cayman aplenty, and when I say aplenty, crikey, do I mean it. I have never seen so many caiman in one place. No aggro. They weren't jostling, you know, they were climbing all over each other, but there was no aggro. And in the middle of this particular wetland, there was one single capybara. And I'm like, these things are part of the crocodilia family. Why are they not going for the capybara? But they were so bloated on all the fish, they were just sunning themselves. They were simply just moderating temperature and just relaxing, digesting. And I couldn't get enough of them. I just could not believe how many caiman there were. And then every so often you'd get a cow just stepping through them. The most bizarre, but the most wonderful thing. But obviously, what I was here for ideally was to see jaguar. And once you disembark the high open vehicle and get into your motorized boat, from here we make our way to a jaguar retreat, which is your accommodation option for the next 4 nights. Now, we can offer, through different trips, accommodation in Porta Joffre, and this is where there are also a number of flotels, so permanently moored floating hotels. We can put you in those, and you're in the heart of the action. This is the start of the jaguar zone. So the Capybara River at this point is wide, lined with these sandbanks where you've got the happy cappies or the capybaras. And it was here that I had that wonderful first sighting that I talked about right at the start of the presentation. But we were going here to Jaguar Retreat. It's about 45 kilometers outside Porta Joffre. And the reason we choose to stay here is simply because you are away from the crowds. There were times when there are quite a few boats all looking at one particular jaguar sighting. And that's fine, that's absolutely fine. But if you can experience a jaguar sighting to yourself, it takes on a whole, the experience is just amplified and elevated. So by staying that little bit upriver, 40 odd kilometers north of Porta Joffre, you're still within what is known as the jaguar zone, which covers the Capybara River and a number of its tributaries. But if you're slightly out of it and you come across a jaguar or another sighting, chances are you'll have it to yourself, but you're still close enough to the action to get into Porta Joffre if you need to. So the more you traverse the river, the more chance you are going to come across wildlife. So there's absolutely, it's a positive staying up here. And there is nothing else around this lodge. We were woken up by howler monkeys across the other side of the river every morning. And one thing that I strongly urge you to do here, because although I went looking for jaguars, one of my favorite memories of this entire trip was after dinner, stepping outside to the back of this building to look at the night sky. And the area behind this building was alive with, I kid you not, millions of fireflies. Quite simply one of the most captivating things I've ever seen. And I just stood there and I soaked it up and I thought, this place is something else. So this is the Jaguar Retreat. It's small, it's spotlessly clean, ensuite rooms with air conditioning, but very, very simple. And one restaurant area here. There are a couple of hammocks lying around the place, and then immediately behind this building you have the beach from where you head out. Now you can just sit on that beach for a little bit and just take in your surrounding, watch the birds having a little bathe, wonderful heron shots that they'll just come and literally stand right next to you on the beach. Caiman are on that beach, and again, you just stand right next to them. They don't move. It's quite incredible how they are so comfortable with our presence. Then this is where you go out on your morning and your afternoon safaris. You can see the type of boats that we're going out in. Usually a 6-seater would be the maximum for 6 clients per boat, plus the driver and spotter. And off you go down the river. taking in primates, taking in jabiru nests as you go, taking in all sorts, well, whatever happens to be there, to be honest. We'd only been out maybe 20 minutes and we came across a female with her 6-month-old cub. Now, jaguars will usually have 2 cubs, occasionally up to 4, but this female was with her 6-month-old cub, and we were able to watch them. The first thing I saw was her walking along next to us and then entering the water with the cub, swimming alongside our boat, getting out. They were on the prowl, they were hunting, and they, again, just so unfazed at our presence, and it was an absolute privilege to spend the afternoon with them. We left them after about half an hour. We were told by some other guests at the lodge that shortly after we left, they caught a yellow anaconda, and mum was eating from one end, cub was eating from the other, and they gradually came together to meet in the middle. What a sighting. Didn't matter that we weren't there for it. Every sighting was spectacular, you know, absolutely just an amazing place. When you leave the main river and head up into the tributaries, this is also, it's just nice to just sit and just enjoy the scenery. We saw Karakara just sitting on the riverbanks. We saw Jacana waddling along on the riverbanks. I just like this because you can just see the depth of the tree root and also the watermarks on the trunk. So you can see the huge variation between high water and low season water between May and November. Every turn you get your happy cappies, just couldn't get enough of these guys. And then during our first afternoon outing, I also got my wish of a fantastic giant river otter sighting. We came across 8 to 10, quite a large family group. A lot of work is being done actually to identify individuals. They have unique neck spots, they have pale undersides to their neck, and quite distinctive markings. So a lot of work is being done to try and better understand the social system of these creatures. What I thoroughly enjoyed was the bickering. They are noisy creatures, and they were fishing and they were hunting. So they literally, they are so agile and so fast, and then they would just stop dead having caught something and just chow down, and you could hear their teeth chomping through bone. Sorry to be so graphic, but it was just, they're there, they're less than a meter away from you. And then they would rest up and they would start to groom each other. They rest on the beach, they sometimes rest on the, over the tree trunks that have fallen into the river. But absolutely captivating. And this wasn't the only time we saw them. We saw them on every outing. It still pains me to think about one outing where there was a single otter on its own, and it was calling frantically. It was screaming, literally screaming, to try and locate its pack. I don't know what happened to it, but you could sense how vulnerable it felt. Maybe I'm over emotionalizing it, but wonderful, wonderful creatures. And then there's the sheer privilege as you go through these tributaries where they get smaller and smaller and the river channels become very, very narrow. And that's what happened when we came across this one. She was having an afternoon snooze. She was completely aware that we drifted under her nose to get past her, and then we were going to have to drift back right underneath her nose in order to get back out onto the main river. She just lay there and she just watched, and if I'd lifted my arm up, I would have been able to touch her. Obviously I didn't, that would be a little bit daft, but such a privilege, such an incredible privilege. So yeah, she was she was quite an older cat, but she was absolutely wonderful. The next morning, who needs an alarm clock? I've mentioned the howler monkeys. Such a haunting sound, but such a perfect way to start your day. And from there, cuckoos, gyra cuckoos, G-U-I-R-A, gyra, but cuckoos nonetheless. A whole riverbank was just full of them, all fluffed up, catching the first of the sun's rays. And then out of nowhere, cruising along the river, and we hear a huge debacle going on our left-hand side. And before we knew it, a tapir had shot across the river right in front of us and was desperately trying to get out on the other side. But the banks were high and they were steep, and she was a big animal. And she was trying desperately to get up here. She was unsuccessful, so she came back into the river, swam to the next little opening. Eventually she got up and she shot across to the other side. So whether there was a jaguar in the area that had spooked her, we don't know, but you've just got to expect the unexpected. Fabulous. We then met up with two brothers and we saw them quite a lot over the course of 4 days. Normally solitary. I've since heard from clients who've been out there since my visit 2.5 years ago that they're still around and they're still together. So again, just wonderful to watch them. This is just to give you a bit of an idea of the scenery as they just amble along the beach on the bottom left of the picture there. And you know, you leave the jaguars, next thing you've got a caiman with a mouthful of fish. You've got, you know, iguanas, pale green, the most beautiful colour. You've got flycatchers. You've just got the unexpected yet again. Buffalo. What on earth are buffalo doing in the Pantanal? Well, they're there. I believe they've been imported, and essentially we just came round and there were maybe 7 or 8 individuals just semi-lying in the river on a sandbank. This one got up, got stroppy, as buffaloes do, started headbutting the mud bank, flinging the mud all over, and then he decided to charge across the river and all the others followed him in hot pursuit. Most bizarre that they're there. And they're not the only creatures that swim. We were also treated to watching this young male hunt, and he hunted successfully right in front of us. We watched him swimming across the channels, walking across semi-submerged sandbars, through to the other side, beautifully clear markings on the back of his ears, like most cats, potentially a communication, a follow me signal. And he just went through this water hyacinth. He was in, he was out, he was back in the river, he was out. He was clearly looking for prey. And you know how cats sometimes just do the most unexpected thing? He was back in the water at one point and just swimming along, and then almost in the blink of an eye, he reared up onto his hind legs, put out his front paws, claws outstretched, and he pounced, threw himself forward. Next thing we knew, he had a caiman by the back of its head and he was dragging it across the sandbar to an elevated point, and then he started to tuck in. That was in the morning. In the afternoon, we went out, we saw a National Geographic boat and there was nobody else. We thought, well, we'll just sit here for a little bit. A male had been seen in the area, and we came to basically spend about 2 hours with this quite notorious cat. So he's an old guy. He's been about a bit. He's a bit beaten up. If you can see his right eye, it's slightly pink. He's obviously come to grief, whether he was hunting or fighting with another male. But very apt. This guy is called Mick Jaguar, like Mick Jagger. And he was just a wonderful cat to spend our last afternoon in the jaguar zone with. Real privilege. We watched him bothered by the sandflies. He would then get up, he'd just give himself a bit of a shake off and go and flop down somewhere else. But he was most happy to oblige, just sitting there, minding his own business until the sun started to go down, and then he prowled off into the undergrowth. So 4 nights in the jaguar zone, and I just could not believe my luck at how much we had seen. 16 jaguars, 24 sightings, as I mentioned before, but all this other wildlife as well. It was just an extravaganza. So it was almost with a heavy heart that we made our way back to Porto Jofre, got out of the motorboats, got into the high open vehicle and made our way back up the Trans-Pantanera. But we still had a few nights to go, and that was at South Wild Pantanal Lodge. So it's just off the Trans-Pantanera, it's on the river, to do walking, river and driving safaris from here. So just a little bit of something different. I went to go for a swim the first afternoon, and there were capybara by the pool, so I declined. But the key thing I remember for this particular lodge, the feeders, all of the lodges have bird feeders, but to be able to sit and to watch the hummingbirds and the plethora of other birds, including this jabiru stork with her chicks. So they've got this slightly leaning tower that you can see here, and you can make your way up it gingerly, I might add, when you get towards the top, and that then gives you the opportunity to look down into a jabiru's nest, which is quite something. There we are, she was feeding the chicks. She actually had 4 of them, and it was just a sight to behold, really. And every morning, what happens here is the seed feeders are filled up, and also seeds are laid out on trees facing west. And the beauty of this, these toucans that you can see here, toko toucans, as the sun came up, it's facing east. So as the sun came up, it came up behind them, and as it shone through the beaks, it illuminated those beaks with such a force of colour. It just had to be seen to be believed. And then see them picking individual seeds off that tree and feeding themselves was just wonderful. We do go out on the boats here. We saw reptiles, capybara everywhere. We had the opportunity to see kingfishers fishing. And really the piece de resistance here was the privilege again of spending an afternoon with a really sought after bird if you're a birder, and this is an agami heron. The colours, this photo doesn't do the colours justice. If you imagine when you were at school and you were in art and you used to get that thick gouache paint and you would add water to it, the thick paint was what the consistency, what the matte colouring on these feathers looked like, and that it was a deep purpley rust grey, just fantastic, an absolutely stunning creature. And they also have an ocelot hide. Now, all credit to my colleague Sarah Malcolm, who took this amazing photo. Just before sunset on every night that you stay here, you would walk about 100 to 200 meters. That's probably about the most walking you'll do on this entire trip, really. There's very little walking involved. But you'd walk 100 or 200 meters along the river, and you get to a purpose-built seating area. There you sit quietly listening to all the sounds of the forest starting to quieten down and the nocturnal creatures starting to come out. And they actually put down bait on the tree trunks so that when the ocelots come, they will climb up the trees, giving you fantastic photo opportunities. Now, I didn't see ocelot on my few nights here, but that was purely because there were jaguar tracks all over the lodge. If there are jaguars around, the ocelots, being so much smaller, are going to keep a low profile. But as I say, my colleague Sarah saw ocelot on her visit, and I mean, what a great opportunity, fantastic opportunity to see a really wonderful little creature. So in a nutshell, this is so corny, in a Brazil nutshell, get it? Sorry, very dreadful, I know, but I came up with that this afternoon, had to get it in there. Don't take my word for it, don't take my colleague's word for it. Really, the Pantanal is the gift that just keeps on giving. You just go there with perhaps one creature in mind, like I did, and you come back just simply overawed by everything that you've seen. So Here it comes. We've got another dreadful pun coming up. Just get out there as soon as you possibly can, because it is jaw-droppingly awesome. And on that note, I'm sorry, that was really quite dreadful. 2 dreadful puns in one go, but that's pretty much me, really. So yeah, that's it. That's the Pantanal, easily combined with Iguazu Falls, with the Amazon, with the South Pantanal, with Cristalino Rainforest Lodge, harpy eagle nests. Crikey, the options are endless. So if you tell us how you want to do it, we will find a way of doing it. If you want a few nights in Rio, go for it. Why not, when in Rome? So really, yeah, that's it from me. So if anybody has any questions, please fire them over. Chris, do you have any questions?
Do you know, I do. The very interesting, the first question I have for you is, if you want to go to Rio, what's it got to do with Rome? Hey, look, I've got to say thank you very much. My goodness, what an amazing presentation. Crikey, if I didn't want to go to Brazil before, having been a couple of times in the past myself, luckily, and been to some of the places you've been to too, I definitely want to go now. Goodness gracious, what an absolutely tremendous presentation.
Oh, I know.
Hey, thank you. So look,
it's
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, you've gone all tingly, haven't you? Look, I have got some questions for you. I've actually got lots of questions, far too many to actually be able to answer, for you to be able to answer, for me to be able to ask you. But I'll put a few to you. So to begin with, I think we've had a number of questions about the seasons.
Okay.
And about the best time to see jaguars, giant anteaters, ocelots, jaguarundis, and all these lovely, lovely animals. And I think, I know you did mention it during the course of your presentation, but perhaps you could just run over the season thing again. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. So all of those creatures are there year round. I mean, they've even got, my colleague Em, who went in 2019, she even saw maned wolf, would you believe, not in the jaguar zone. So all of these creatures are there year round. However, they're largely cut off from us during the wet season. So the wet season starts in November and it runs through to about April. Once that rain has fallen, it then makes its way into the Pantanal, heading from north to south. So really, in terms of accessibility, you can only really visit from the very end of May through to end of October, November. So essentially, let's say June to October inclusive. That's the dry season. In that season, the later you go, the hotter it gets. However, the water sources diminish. So colleagues of mine who've gone in June, someone else has gone in July, I went in September, Em went in September, we all had phenomenal sightings. So any time, and certainly with all of our group trips and feedback that we've had from clients that we've sent, it doesn't matter when in that dry season you go. If you prefer a slightly cooler temperature, go earlier, i.e. June, July, and if you don't mind heat, go later. But you know, certainly everyone we've sent so far has been very lucky.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. That's coincidentally rather similar to the dry season in Southern Africa, isn't it? But
very much so. Very much so.
That's another problem, isn't it? Juggling, you know, one part of the world with another part of the world.
Yeah.
Hey, so just thinking about some of these lovely trips and some of the lovely lodges. What about walking? You mentioned walking at certain points. Is there a lot of walking from the lodges? Is that
not at all? So on the trip that I did, where the first couple of nights are spent at Pouso Alegre, so Pouso Alegre has those raised bridges. You can go off walking, you can go unguided, or you can go with a guide. And you can do as much or as little as you like. You know, even if you just sat on your veranda at the lodge, the amount of bird life that you're likely to see would keep you happily occupied for quite a few hours. So other than that, there's really very little walking involved. You know, because in the jaguar zone, it's all by water, so you're in boats. Going up and down the Pantanal, that's all vehicle. So there's very little walking involved. So anybody really, you know, I would recommend it for.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And actually, there is a related question, or a question actually that's related to the last two. In fact, one about sort of timing, and one about walking, perhaps. And it's been asked by a number of people, including someone just Liz a couple of seconds ago. Hot and dry, or hot and humid, or you know?
I found it hot and dry when I went. It was hot. You know, but by the time you get to September, October, you're talking 30 degrees plus. I don't mind the heat. When you're out on the boats, you've got the natural air conditioning of the fact that you're on a motorboat. But when you stop, a lot of people did have handheld, you know, there's little handheld fans that you can get. But for me, it was a very hot and dry heat. Weirdly enough, however, the day I got there, people were walking around in ski jackets, because this area is susceptible to cold fronts from Antarctica, and they just come and you know, the temperature can drop by 15 degrees overnight. It's very bizarre. So pack for all weathers, but average daytime temperatures, if you go in June, will be around 20, 25, and it will get much hotter towards 30, mid-30s when you go in September, October. So for a lot of people, when you go is really to do with your internal temperature gauge, whether you are fine with heat or whether you prefer it a bit cooler.
Sure. Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you. And issues with insects, bad problems with insects and things like that, or?
I didn't see a single spider or insect when I went in September 2018. My colleague Emma, who went in September 2019, had a lot of insects. So we always suggest wearing a buff when you need to be completely covered, because you're out in the boats from maybe sort of 7 in the morning till 11 o'clock midday. And then you're going out again at about 2:30 in the afternoon till about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're out in the hot sun all day, so you need to be completely covered. So if you just have a buff that you can pull up from your neck to cover your face, and glasses, then that will stand you in good stead against insects when you're on the boats and so on. That's as well as a natural sunscreen.
Well, indeed, absolutely.
Yeah.
There've been. I'm not quite sure what you know about the wildfires side of things. They were pretty bad last year, and I know they affected a lot of the Pantanal.
Yeah.
Any intel on what the story is at the moment? Perhaps not so much about the fires, perhaps more about the recovery.
This is a really tricky one, because obviously no one has been out there, in the last couple of months. So the last season was affected by COVID. So we would normally be sending, people out there between June and October, November. So we didn't have anyone out there last year. However, the press, yes, were very much talking about the wildfires, saying that they were man-made, but drought conditions exacerbated them. There have been, you just have to Google it and you can see very unfortunate photos of scorched reptiles, and there's a lot of work going on to help jaguars that burnt their paws and that sort of thing, so that medical aid is happening out there, but without having sent anyone out there ourselves, it's we'd have to get in touch with our contacts on the ground really to answer more specifically on that. But
sure.
But it's Australia, California, wildfires are happening everywhere. And again, the one thing that is always coming out of all of this is that don't let it keep you away, because it's through tourism that funds get into these local economies to actually do some good.
I couldn't agree more. Now, the last question that I have time to answer you is actually about the lodges and things that you've been lucky enough to go to. I've also been lucky enough to go to a number of them. But if there was one lodge that, because they're different to the African lodges, aren't they? Let's face it. But if there's one lodge, you could say, look, you know, there's one place for whatever reason, one of the lodges that I've been to is, you know, for me, you know, the number one. Which one would it be?
For me, it's Jaguar Retreat. Jaguar Retreat. So where you have the 4 nights in the Jaguar zone, I think purely and utterly because of location. There's nothing else around you, so it's pure wilderness. It's not an area where boats are just going to go past you because there's nothing beyond you. So you really just have that area to yourself. My colleague Sarah, during her visit, they went 2 bends in the river down from the lodge one morning, and they had a jaguar to themselves for that entire morning. And you just can't put a price on that. So these lodges, they're not in the same league as African lodges. Don't go in there thinking you're going to have these beautiful elevated thatched roofs and silver service. And you know, it's all about simplicity, but it's about where you are, really. So you've got your aircon, you've got your en-suites, you've got everything you need. But you know, it's not plush, it's not fancy, but you know, if they do a mean caipirinha every afternoon, it's a nice way to end the day.
Your favourite cocktail?
Hey, say again?
I said, is that your favourite cocktail?
Pretty much. Well, apart from in Baja when it's margaritas. You have to adapt to your surroundings.
You've got to, yes. Yes, very good mammals do that sort of thing. That's cool.
Yeah, key to survival.
Yeah. Hey, look, I haven't got time to ask you any more questions other than, may I just ask you to put on that final slide for me?
Oh, sorry, yes.
That's all right. No, you're in the right place. It's all cool. So look, thank you very much to all of you who've been on the presentation this evening. I know, Helen, I speak on behalf of everybody because I'm seeing all sorts of wonderful comments coming in on the chat. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. It was really, really good.
I feel like I need to buy you all earplugs. Sorry.
I think you need to buy me a drink, probably more important. Hey, look, so to those of you that have been on the talk, thank you so much. I say it when I'm lucky enough to be involved in these talks, when they let me out, how grateful and humbled we always are that people take the time to spend their evenings with us. We really, really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. We've got plenty of other talks coming up. You'll see from that slide in front of you that you can see on your screens, the next talk is actually being done by Sarah Malcolm. And it's all about sketchbook safaris, and these are brilliant. This is all about sketching and drawing and all that kind of stuff when you're on safari. So Helen's talking next week. Sarah's talking next week. I beg her pardon. On the 26th. We will be emailing you in the course of the next 24 hours or so, and we will send you a reminder of the discount code that you can see in front of you, which is BRZoom21. And that will give you £100 discount per person off a Brazil holiday that you book, which would, I'm sure, go some way towards buying you a few caipirinhas when you're in Brazil. There are varying prices depending on where you are. Please don't forget that we've got a new brochure available. You can see a lovely picture of an elephant on the front of our brochure there. You won't find any elephants in Brazil, but you will find them in our brochure. And I'm now going to end the meeting for everybody and bid you all a very enjoyable remainder of your evening. Thank you very much for joining us.